Thank you for tuning into Gods, Demons, and Magic. This is your host, Sri Satchidananda Das. We're continuing to explore the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus, and within this ancient text, the Egyptian priest Abaman is explaining to the Greek philosopher Porphyry the nature of the gods and other supernatural beings and how to interact with them through the practice of theurgy or magic ritual. Under this particular section, he's discussing, or rather comparing and contrasting, the various supernatural beings. How are the Daemons different from the gods, and how are the Daemons different from the half-gods or demigods? And it's wonderful because it gives us a view into the mindset of the people that lived at this time. Essentially, when they looked into the sky, they saw the material manifestation of the gods. And you look at the sun floating in the sky, that ball of fire. To them, you're actually looking at not necessarily the physical body of a god, but you're looking at sort of like a manifestation of an astral god into our physical sphere. You have the sun god was considered to be the king of the gods, and he sort of descended down into the world, from the astral plane in the form of the sun. And the sun is that force which is then giving life and sustenance to everything within the universe. It's the very sort of almost the soul of the universe itself. But higher than this physical manifestation, there is an astral sun, the noetic sun, which is the sun god himself, sort of like ruling over the gods and illuminating their realm with his divine brilliance and glory. And this brilliance and glory, he actually brings down himself from the transcendent realm, almost just like a prism. You take a ray of light and shine it through a prism and it bursts into the beautiful rainbow. So similarly, you have like the divine light of the transcendent realm, sort of the one or the absolute or the realm of God. And that light of God descends into the world and then shines through the sun god and the astral realm, and it illuminates all the other gods and fills them with their power and potency. And then these gods take that power and utilize it to manifest the created world around us. So just as the sun god then in this physical realm, in our realm, he has his manifestation as the ball of fire in the sky, the sun itself. So similarly, the other gods also have a physical manifestation, and these are the planets. And just as the sun god is the center of the realm of the gods, and they derive all their power and glory from him, and they sort of circle around him as subjects might circle around a king. So similarly, all the planets, which are the physical manifestations of the gods, they all circle around the sun within the universe. So for the ancients, when they'd look up at the sky and they'd see Jupiter or Saturn or Mercury, they would think, they would see that I'm looking at the physical manifestation of a god. Now, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily the body of a god. The god may have another body which they manifest and they walk around, and it has a particular form and beauty and all of these things. Sort of like the astral body of the god. And neither is the god necessarily that body, according to Abaman. The gods themselves are greater than their bodies. They're like a universal potency or energy which pervades the entire universe. And the bodies that they may manifest are sort of like portions of that energy. Rather than them being within their bodies, the bodies are sort of like within them, and they manifest them almost like a mask, in order to deal with the world or perform various activities. But the gods are not bound by their bodies, and they're greater than their bodies. So similarly, these planets that are floating in the sky, they're also sort of like a manifestation of the god. It's not necessarily the god or the god's body. It's like a manifestation of his potency. And then in our physical realm, that potency exists as, like a planet made of stone or gas or whatever it may be made of. And then these planets then affect the universe according to the laws of astrology, which features very prominently in the ancient tradition we're discussing. So it's not that the planets, the physical planets made of gas or stone or liquid, they're not the ones actually affecting us, you might say, or activities of humans on Earth in astrology. Rather, it's sort of the astral field of the planet. The conception given by the Egyptian priest Abaman is that higher than these physical planets, you actually have an astral planet which is there, and it's almost like a concentration of the power of that god, or like you might say, an energy point of that particular god where their universal power and consciousness is focused. And so it's that astral planet, which is behind the physical planet, that then sort of shines out its astral rays throughout the universe. And those rays interact and mix together in concordance with the divine order, or you might say the law of karma, and conduct the affairs of all entities on this particular plane of existence. So it's important to remember that the conception given here by Abaman is that the planets themselves in the sky, they're sort of physical manifestations of the gods, and yet the gods are far greater, or you might say more spread out throughout the universe than just a particular planet. And those physical planets made of rocks and dust and all that stuff, that's just sort of like a manifestation into our physical realm of a higher astral principle, which is a sort of like a focusing or a conglomeration of the astral power of that god into a particular point in space. And then all these energies of the gods, they sort of crisscross and interact together to conduct the various affairs of life on Earth, and according to the laws of astrology, which is read, of course, by astrologers. And they're able to, astrology is almost like a divination into the realm of the gods, and trying to understand with your own tuition and your own understanding of the patterns, the sacred patterns, what are the gods doing and what's going to happen, how are they going to affect life on Earth. And generally it's not, they may actually cause physical things to happen, but a lot of times what it is the planets, the sort of astral energy that they're emanating as they interact with each other, it affects your own astral body, and you'll experience that as overwhelming desires and overwhelming thoughts. And so the gods, in a sense, are affecting or coloring your own astral body and your own mind and consciousness, and you become filled with an intense desire or urge, or a certain situation arranges itself to you in your life, and you may or may not choose to take advantage of it. So in this way, you have the various planets are the manifestations of the gods, and their energies shine throughout the universe and affect everything. And so the gods may be invisible to humans, as we mentioned in earlier episodes. The gods are actually, their bodies, according to the ancient Greeks, are considered to be made of ether, sort of like the air of the heavenly realms. And so you can't see them. Our physical human bodies don't have the capacity to see them. Our eyes are not subtle enough. And yet they do manifest in a visible form as the planets. So the planets, in a sense, are a visible manifestation of the astral potency of that god. And so this physical realm that we exist in, it's kind of like riding on top of this astral realm, or the noetic realm, which is where almost like a puppet is pulled by a strings, And so the astral realm is really like the realm of the strings. And everything going on here is kind of just a physical machination, or it's just moving on top of the astral movements that are going on under the surface. And the gods are actually living and existing within this subtler realm. Now, the Daemons, these sort of lower supernatural beings who exist as via mediums between gods and humans, they carry messages back and forth, and they sort of, the good Daemons will lift human beings upward in their consciousness and assist them to sort of purify themselves and come in harmony with the divine will, which manifests through the gods. Bad Daemons, of course, are sort of like represent those aspects of nature like lust and greed and anger and fear and these kind of lower qualities in reality, and they may draw our consciousness towards them. And so you have this sort of world filled with these supernatural beings that ultimately exist under the order and authority of the gods, but aren't quite as powerful nor as respectable as the gods. And they're also invisible, just like the gods are. But that doesn't mean they're on the same level of the gods. The Egyptian priest Abaman, he makes it very clear that the Daemons are on a much lower level, and they shouldn't be confused with the gods. Sometimes we sort of clump all astral beings or supernatural beings in one category. But Abaman, he warns us not to do that. The demons are on a much lower level than the gods. In fact, they're not even comparable. And the Daemons, they're kind of like, they're messengers of the gods, and they also, one of their main jobs is to carry human beings into their bodies according to, you might say, the karma of that particular birth. And they perform many different functions within sort of lower reality, this physical material reality, on behalf of the gods. But there's a sense in which they're also affected by material reality. Whereas the gods are sort of high and perfect and pure and exist above and beyond matter and are always in a position of control and authority over matter, the Daemons are sort of in between gods and man, and so they are in many ways affected by matter. They work within it, and they sort of fulfill the desires of the gods within nature, but they're also to a certain degree covered by nature or corrupted by it. And the gods are never mixed with or corrupted by that which is lower than them. Whereas human beings are always kind of controlled and corrupted by things lower than us. We're attracted to the things we create, and we become controlled by them, say, for example, like a certain technology. The gods never do this. They're always above and beyond such control. Whereas the Daemons are kind of in between. Sometimes they are controlled by the things which are lower than them. And Abaman makes the point that the gods are always higher than the Daemons, even if the gods were visible, or even if the gods were somehow made of physical earth, just as we are, earth and water and air. They would still be higher than the Daemons, even though the Daemons may be a more subtle being. So the gods have this position which can never be challenged or changed of superiority. And the gods, they're not only invisible beyond our physical sight, but really they're beyond our thought and reason. Human consciousness or human logic cannot actually fathom the gods. Like, they exist on a level beyond our comprehension. So in one sense, this podcast is it's almost like useless as far as like understanding the gods, because you can kind of point to them and gain a certain amount of reverence, which is really what Abaman seems to be trying to do. Oftentimes he's critical of Porphyry, that you don't really have enough reverence or respect for the gods. And that really comes from having knowledge of the gods, or understanding to a certain degree what their position is, and sort of being awed by them. And that's actually, he mentions later, that's necessary to actually invoke the gods, to have this knowledge and to have the proper attitude towards them. But the gods are really beyond our thought and comprehension. Even when understanding facts or points about them, we never really can. They're just too great. And similarly, the various rituals that one uses to summon them, they're not really summoned by them. Rather, you're raising your consciousness through that ritual to a level at which you can perceive them. And nor are they controlled by the ritual, nor are they, even though you have to have knowledge of them to perceive them in the ritual or to perform the ritual properly, that knowledge doesn't actually contact them. It's the ritual itself. So even that little bit of knowledge you may have of the gods, ultimately it's not that important. The gods are beyond your small attempts by your mind to understand them. Rather, if you perform the proper rituals with the proper attitude, then the gods want to actually contact you and interact with you. And so it's kind of like by their divine will, they'll interact with you. And your own capacity to understand them, your intelligence, all these things, they really don't have any effect on the god, nor your power to perform ritual, how well you do it, how expert you are at chanting the various prayers and mantras. None of these things actually have power over the gods, nor does it compel them to appear, anything like that. Only when you have the proper attitude and then you perform the ritual properly, then, as we mentioned previously, it's kind of like, you're tuning into their frequency and you're calling out to them on their frequency, and then they can hear it very loudly and clearly. Especially when you're using the various symbols and rituals associated with that god on their particular frequency of prayer, etc., then they hear you're calling them very clearly. And when you have the right consciousness, the attitude of humility and supplication, then it's a very powerful call, and the gods will hear, and they will respond by their own free will. And that response is also, according to Abaman, it's a kind of like, it's a blessing. It's really the movement of the divine will. and it's something far greater than you. It's almost like even greater than the gods in a sense. It's all part of the divine plan emanating from the absolute platform. And when the gods agree to interact with you, it's like you're being swept up into the current of this divine purpose. So that's another important point here, is that the gods are beyond human capacity of thought and reason, and although it is important to understand them properly, ultimately even they're beyond that understanding. Even if you have the proper conception, they exist beyond that conception. But having the right attitude and the right understanding is necessary to sort of call out to them properly. But when they do answer, it's ultimately it's because of the divine will and divine purpose, and it's above and beyond your capacity to call them. And also Brahman mentions that the gods have within themselves the ability to govern both the astral realm as well as the visible physical realm. They're governing both. And so that's perhaps why they have a physical manifestation in the form of the planets. Like Jupiter, Saturn, all these different planets. They exist as kind of like, because the gods are not only in the astral realm, they're also controlling this realm. And therefore they have their representation there as a physical planet. Just as the sun has his representation, at the center of our solar system and the center of life itself here in this particular place. And just as the gods have their authority over a particular part of nature, it's like their consciousness extends throughout the universe and encompasses that particular aspect of the universe. Like the god of fire, his consciousness will extend all throughout all the various types of fire within the universe. Just as our consciousness extends throughout our body, and you may feel someone pinch your leg or something like that. So similarly, all the fire in the universe, the god of fire is conscious of all this. And the Daemons, who are of a much lower nature, their consciousness will then expand only to that small aspect of nature they're in control of. So they might not be in control of something on the universal level. They might be given enough power to do a particular small job on behalf of the gods. But when it comes to that particular slice of the universe that they've been empowered to deal with, then they're conscious of that small space, that small piece. And so in many ways, they're almost like a small god or a tiny god. And we're also the same. We have consciousness of even a smaller portion, which is to say our body. Or maybe even we have control over our family or our cubicle at work or something like that. Or at most, maybe a country for a few years or something. So human beings have a much smaller field in which they dominate and control and in which they're conscious of. And although the gods extend throughout the universe and they're conscious of a large portion of the universe, they're also independent of that aspect of the universe. Like they have a lot of freedom, whereas the Daemons don't have so much freedom, Like the gods, for example, they have, as we mentioned, they have their bodies, and yet they're not bound by those bodies. They actually extend beyond those bodies, and their consciousness is greater than those bodies. And that body is almost like a mask the god is temporarily using or something, which can appear and disappear at the god's will. And so the god is not bound by that body, whereas the Daemons are actually bound in their bodies. If you somehow conjure a daemon and there it is, that's the actual daemon. That's him, that's his body. Whereas if you somehow, a god appears by his great mercy and you're looking at him standing in front of you, that's his body, but it's also kind of like not his body, like he's not bound by it in any way. He can do as he likes. And so ultimately the Daemons are in a submissive role to the gods, and they're always carrying out the will of the gods. And they're bound, in a sense, by their level of consciousness and the particular duty they have to perform on behalf of the gods. And so they're servants of the gods. So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisatchinandan.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.